So, picking back up from where we left off, one of the issues that we're going to really have to deal with when we get into the ideas that drive gender is this idea of making men and masculinity visible. This idea that gender is a women's issue totally disregards that men actually have a gender as well. This generally happens when we talk about dominant minority relationships. The dominant relationship is rarely brought under the microscope, and it's talked as if it doesn't exist. This leads us to the idea that the history of our world is really the history of men's worldviews, opinions, lives, and memories. Feminists have been saying this forever. The history of science is the history of men's science. Until just recently, women's studies attempted to remedy these omissions, distortions, and trivializations, which really created the idea that women's experiences, lives, and stories just didn't matter. But if we're going to be critical, and in this class we are going to be critical, then we need to study men and masculinity when we study gender. Gender is not synonymous with women. When we dive into this topic, we must make privilege and those who have it visible, not merely study the oppressed or the marginalized. We also need to study those in power. As a matter of fact, we probably need to study those in power more than we need to study those that are oppressed, if we're going to focus our energies on changing the system in an effort to rethink gender in a way that is presented more equally versus gender as a presentation of inequality. We must also challenge men and masculinity as being an appropriate reference category. As I've mentioned earlier, we are not gender neutral. And masculinity is not the objective norm. This leads us to understand that men, along with women, are gendered. And we cannot forget that the actions are just as much about age, race, income, sexual preference, as it is about gender. So really what we're talking about is inequality, power, and hegemonic control. And one of the ways of keeping control is through the creation of categories like gender. There's this idea of the plurality of gender, which says that gender varies by place, culture, time, and age, and over a person's life course. It is also structured and mitigated by other identities, such as race, ethnicity, social class, education, sexuality, geography, ability, and religion, among many others. This is really going to take us into the nuances of gender. It's not enough to simply talk about women's experiences or men's experiences. These things become more complex as we add issues of race, issues of ethnicity, issues of social class, sexuality, and many other issues that create social inequality in combination with gender inequality. When we speak of gender, we must speak of masculinities and femininities, plural, because what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine is very different depending on the different types of groups that you're talking to. There is no constant, there is no universal that is essential to the experience of gender. Gender is defined based on time, place, social experience. However, within a certain time, context, and life experience, there will no doubt be a hegemonic gender masculine experience that is ideal for men and an emphasized feminine ideal for women. So we do have these ideal types of what it means to be an ideal man and an ideal woman. But how those ideal types are constructed and how they're embraced by different populations at different times in different places is to be determined. These are fluid categories that rarely measure up to the ideal types of masculine and feminine, whatever those ideal types are in whatever societies that we're taking a look at. Something that we need to think about is avoiding this idea of binary thinking. That despite the presence of gender ideals, we mustn't assume that all men are the same and all women are the same, and men and women are opposite of one another. We know, especially as we move in through the 21st century, that gender is becoming a much more blurry category than it has been in the past. We have seen in 2015, 2016, 2017, the assertion of transgender individuals. And how are we to measure up these transgender individuals with the binary thinking of these ideal types of masculine and feminine? The lines are becoming blurred, and the concept of gender as a result is becoming blurred as well. And it's creating some serious discomfort in our society. People just don't know how to understand gender anymore, especially as the categories change over time. Most men and women actually fall somewhere in the middle, as we know, of the gender spectrum, especially in terms of their beliefs, abilities, traits, and values. The differences between us are a result of our social positions. As we've already discussed, differential socialization is going to create different realities in different places. These positions, of course, craft and mold us in gendered ways, leading us to make deceptive distinctions between men and women. For example, femininity doesn't make women bad at managing money or understanding finances. Femininity dictates motherhood, career trajectories, and workplace experience, which in turn impact money management and financial knowledge. So the negative aspects of femininity in reference to money management are really the social inequalities built within the system itself. There's nothing inherent, physically inherent with women that make them unable to manage financial resources, but there is something within the social structure that creates life chances for them that make them less likely to be able to manage their finances in a way that makes them financially well off. But this is changing as well. Moreover, few differences are hardwired into 100% of us. Our differences are average ones, as we can tell from this chart. The differences that exist among all men on average or all women on average are greater. And we also overlap much more than we different. When we look at men's and women's IQ averages, the IQ scores are the same, but the range of possible IQ scores vary. As you can see, there's more women that peak out closer to the mean than men. We also have to think about the politics of gender. Gender differences are not solely the property of one's individual identity. We negotiate our gendered identities within and among gendered social institutions. So we are socialized by the family, we are socialized by the school, we are socialized in the workplace, and that in turn helps us construct our personal gender identity. It's the combination of structure and agency that we have to pay attention to when we're talking about the politics of gender. Our gender conformance is rewarded and our gender nonconformance is labeled as deviant and punished. This is just part of the socialization process. We also have to realize that it's our social institutions that reproduce and reify gender differences that we then have to account for in our own personal identities. In this course, we're going to argue that the only way out of this is through sameness, but it is double bind for women. When women succeed as women, they are labeled as incapable of succeeding in masculine spheres, i.e. the military and politics, but when women succeed in masculine spheres, they are labeled as unsuccessful women, i.e. less feminine. So the idea of being treated the same doesn't always work out the way that we hope it will. The idea has to be married up to the political environment that these gender roles and social norms are hammered out. As we further look into the politics of gender, we have to realize that both difference and domination are produced and reproduced in our social interactions, in the institutions which we live and work. Though the differences between us are not as great as we often assume, they become important in our expectations and our observations. Basic ways that females are treated in the school setting might not seem as important early on in their development, but over time, those differences could create false expectations or limited expectations of where women can go or where females can go when they become women. As we move forward with this book, we're going to examine these differences and reveal both those that are real and important and those that are neither real nor important. We're going to explore how gender inequality provides the foundations for gender difference, and we're going to show the impact of gender on our everyday lives. This is the primary things that we're going to try to accomplish as we move through lecture in this course, as we dig into the material from the textbook and supplemental readings and the book that we do a review of. So as we move forward in this class, these are the primary things that we're going to try and tease out, try and tackle, understand, and I don't think we'll change society, but maybe if you come into this course with an open mind, we can change the way you see gender for the rest of your life. And then how you socialize people throughout your life to see gender in a new light. In the end, some important concepts to think about for this particular chapter: biological determinism, deceptive distinctions, differential socialization, of course emphasized femininity, gender difference, gender inequality, the interplanetary theory of gender difference, the invisibility of privilege, and masculinities. If you can understand these concepts, then you'll most likely do pretty well on the exam in reference to Chapter 1.